Can't hear you.
I have the pleasure of introducing basically a great American hero. He's been holding the line against the evil hordes of Lucifer. Yeah. Seriously, talk about takes body punches and keeps on taking. This is the mayor of one of the greatest cities, El Cajon, and he has higher aspirations to basically save America. Should I announce it? You can, sure. The 51st Congress. Truly a remarkable man, as you probably, he's kept us abreast on some of the challenges he's had as a mayor. And it has, when you have, people out there challenging every step for, what would I say, ideological reasons. So with no further ado, I'm going to give this over to you. Thanks. Good Sunday morning. How are you?
Yay.
Can you believe what's happening in Kentucky right now with this revival? I think it's really interesting because are you guys following that whole revival thing?
Yeah.
So it's Asbury Theological Seminary, which is in Kentucky, is a church where they had a revival in 1950 and in 1970, and nothing since then. And then about 12, 13 days ago, they had a normal prayer meeting in the morning, and it just didn't end. They felt the presence of God there, and they continued to worship and pray throughout the day. Students heard what was going on. They started coming into the chapel, and it got bigger and bigger. It went 24 hours. Students from other campuses started coming. Pastor Garlow got involved in this, our Pastor Garlow, because that's where he went to seminary, so it means a lot to him. And what was happening was that for the past 12 days now, it's gone 24 hours a day, and people from all over the world and all over the country are going there, and they're getting involved in this revival. Now, there's a lot of skepticism, certainly skepticism on the left from non-Christians and non-believers are skeptical about it, but there's a lot of Christians that are skeptical about it as well. I spoke to a pastor friend of mine yesterday who said, well, I'd like for it to be true. I don't know what it is. I know that people a lot of times get emotional about these things, and it can be emotionally driven. But in my estimation, it really doesn't matter. My gut feeling is that this is a movement of God happening in America, because I think that there are people all throughout this country that are getting on their knees and they're praying and they're asking God to intervene in our lives in ways that we never have before. And I'll get into that in a minute. But even if it's somehow more emotional and less spiritual, I don't think that it really matters, because I think it's indicative of what's happening in the country right now. And because I think people are waking up, and it's interesting we use that term waking up because the left has taken the term woke, and they have woken up in their vocabulary to this idea that everybody's racist and the country needs to be torn down to its studs and rebuilt as a communist utopia. I think that the real definition of woke should be that we, as Americans, as traditional Americans, as Christians, which, let's face it, America is a Christian country. It was established as a Christian country. It's always been a Christian country. Certainly there have been outliers throughout our history of people that didn't believe and people that believed in other things. But predominantly, I'm old enough to remember what life was like in the 60s and the 70s, when America had a Christian, Judeo-Christian philosophy. And I really, aside from radical people, the super radical, I'm even non-believers and even people that are Democrats, it's hard to find somebody who thinks that life today is better than life was a while back. Certainly, there's always been problems in America. There always has been problems with race, people hating each other, people being mean to each other. But that's the history of the world. So that's kind of an overview of what I wanted to talk to you about today. And and I don't want to make this a real formal presentation. I'd like to just talk to you and get your thoughts and have a dialogue. But let me just tell you a little bit about what I'm thinking. You mentioned that I'm going to run for Congress in the 51st Congressional District. And that's true. I have decided to do that. And I've decided to do this differently than the traditional way of running for office. I've been in politics long enough now to know that there are certain things you do, certain things you say, there's a suit that you wear, and there's phrases that you utter, and things that you do that are the basic formula for getting elected in America. And I think that that was probably the right way to go for the past 100 years or so, that's kind of what people expected it to be. But I think we're in unusual times right now. I think that all of us realize, and you know what, if you disagree with me, I'd love to have a discussion with you, but the way I look at it is that we're kind of in an existential crisis in America right now, where I think anybody who's really paying attention realizes that the country and frankly the entire world is on precipice, that we're on the precipice of losing the freedoms that we've enjoyed, losing the way of life that we've enjoyed, and changing, and not changing in a positive way. Changing in a way that is filled with darkness, that is filled with the hatred of each other, the hatred of God, the hatred of freedom, the hatred of individuality. And I think that if you're like me, you feel the cold hands of totalitarianism around your neck and start to choke the life out of you. You certainly felt that a lot during COVID. I think that was really the great awakening for the world, to see it pulled the veil back. I think it showed what people wanted to do. There was this very large contingent of people that were very powerful and very well entrenched in our society. They're entrenched in our court system. They're entrenched in our political system. They're entrenched in our entertainment system. They're entrenched in our secondary educational system. They're entrenched in our primary educational system. They're entrenched in our collegiate educational system. They're entrenched in our corporations. Throughout this world, there are people that very much are enemies of freedom.
Yes.
They're enemies of individuality. They're enemies of God. And I don't know about you, but I woke up sometime in 2020 and realized that what I thought was impossible, that America could fall, that America would no longer be the greatest country on earth, that freedom would no longer prevail. Which I thought, if you had told me that, if I had seen a movie in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, which there's always dystopian movies that show how America falls, and we go into this dark 1984 Orwellian type of future. I always took that with a grain of salt and said, well, that's interesting, but it's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's impossible. Well, I don't feel that way. And I think it snuck up on us. It overtook us. And now we're running from behind. But the good news is that people are awake to this problem and they're spiritually in tune with this. And so when I said earlier that I don't think I'm going to run for this office the way that people normally would run for this office, what I mean by that is I'm going to be really honest with people. This race that I'm about to go in against Sarah Jacobs, so the 51st Congressional District makes up El Cajon, La Mesa, down through North Park and Hillcrest, down to Bonita, up to the edge of Poway, Mira Mesa, and even parts of Penasquitos. Well, and you notice that it's not contiguous, right? It's all over the place because they did that on purpose, because they wanted to create a district that can't be won by a Republican. And I am a believer in God, and I believe that God can do whatever he wants to do, but I'm also a realist. I've seen a lot of people run for these kind of seats before, where they said, well, if God wants me to win, I'm gonna win. And then they get slaughtered. And I kind of knew they were gonna get slaughtered because the political science aspect of it wasn't in their favor. And so when I first thought about running for the seat, that was my initial reaction was, well, you know, it's a nice idea, but it's impossible. But slowly and through different people that I experienced throughout the world, it's interesting that God is using people throughout the world for me. People, I have somebody who's speaking in my life from Africa, somebody who's speaking in my life from Switzerland, somebody who's speaking into my life from Japan, and somebody who's speaking into my life from, where is that place? Oh, the Middle East, Egypt. And all these different people are coming and talking in my life, and basically saying the same things. And so when I say I'm not going to do things the way I would normally do them, I'm going to be honest with you. This is a tough race. This is going to be a really hard race. I'm not going to win it by getting up and lying to people and saying, we got this. No problem. It's going to be tough. And it's going to take prayer. We're going to need people from all over every church in City of El Cajon to be constantly praying, and people from all over the country. People from all over the world will be praying. So we had a question. So I'm going to go ahead and take questions. And before I get into this, we can talk about this race. We can talk about what's happening in the country politically. We can talk about what's happening in El Cajon politically. I just want to be here to answer your question. So yes, sir.
I had a thought about if I was to run for governor in the state of California, maybe.
Yeah.
I would
That's fortunate.
I would run policy, but I would think like the opposition. I would run as a Democrat. Me, to be welcome in the Los Angeles area. You said that landscape is Democrat. I would, think like a Democrat. Think what they would say. And let the people separate you apart.
Yeah, well, so that's an interesting idea. It's certainly one that I think every political person thinks about, talks about at some point. You know, people even talk about switching parties. Certainly, the guy who just ran for
Not switching party. Not switching party.
No. I know you're not saying that, but people go as far as that. The gentleman who just ran for mayor of Los Angeles, I forgot his name, but he switched parties from Republican to Democrat. So he felt that that was his only way to get to the people. I think it's a little different. I think that in order to connect with the Democrats, I don't think you don't change your principles and you don't compromise on your principles, but you have to refocus the conversation. And I'll give you an example. This woman I'm running against, she has two major issues that predominate her entire life, everything she talks about. One is trans and gay rights, and the other is abortion. It's all about abortion. It's all about trans rights. It's all about gay rights for her. And nothing else gets discussed. And what's interesting is the Democrats almost always fall for this. If I'm a Democrat politician, you're a Democrat constituent, I tell you, they're going to take away your right to have an abortion. Now, young lady over here, even if you're a Democrat, even if you're pro-life, how much do you think the abortion issue would really affect your personal life right now?
Very low.
Very low, right? Do you think that maybe your life is a little bit more affected by the fact that you might get murdered in your neighborhood because we're letting criminals out without bail? You think the fact that you can't go to Target without walking through a sea of homeless people who are shooting up drugs and urinating and defecating in the parking lot, does that affect your life a little bit more? Does the cost of eggs affect your life a little bit more? Does the cost of gas affect your life? Does the fact that they want to take your gasoline or your gas stove out of your house and your restaurant affect your life? They tell you that you're going to have to get rid of your gas appliances and buy all electric appliances. The fact that they want to put a transponder in your car and track at your every movement and tell you that you can't drive and tell you that you have to pay an extra $1,000 a year for the right to use the freeway. And when you do get on the freeway, half the lanes are gonna be bus lanes and HOV lanes, and you're trying to drive downtown San Diego and bike lanes everywhere, and you can't. Does that affect your life a little bit more than abortion? Absolutely it does. But the problem is that the Democrats are very used to being conditioned to being told, this is the issue, you need to believe it. This is the issue, it's really gonna affect your life. And even if you think your party's a little nuts right now, even if you're a pretty reasonable person and you don't think that 5-year-olds should be transitioned from boys to girls, even if you don't believe that, you have to vote for it, because if you don't, they're gonna take away your abortion rights. And so my challenge is not to compromise, let's take abortion as the main issue. My challenge is not gonna be to compromise on abortion. I'm pro-life, I always have been, I always will. I think it's a fundamental issue. I think one of the main obligations of anybody in government is to protect people that can't protect themselves. That's been my guiding principle as long as I've been there, is to protect people that are weak and protect people that don't have the political voice or the money to protect themselves. And I've done that. And I think in the pro-life issue, you have to do that with unborn children as well, because they can't protect themselves. But I think you have to change the conversation rather than they get into this give and take where they say you're anti-abortion, and then I come back and say, well, you're murderers, and we get this thing. My question is, why are we even talking about this? Abortion is legal in California. It's gonna be legal. There's not a thing you can elect me. You can elect me governor. I couldn't stop it. It is entrenched in the law. It's entrenched in the legislature. You're being duped. You're being manipulated. Amen. Let's talk about things that really matter to you. And that's going to be my challenge, is to talk to people and say, these are things that matter to all Americans, whether you believe in God or you believe in idols and demons. Whether you are a Republican or you're a Democrat, the fact that you can't afford to buy a flat of eggs anymore, that affects your life. That's real stuff. So that's going to be my challenge. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, long-winded. I'm sorry.
Bill, so last election, I was very disappointed because there was a bill concerning abortion statewide. It passed with 73%. And that to me told me that when I walk into a room, 7 people out of there support abortion and all that's going on there. The other thing, the district that you mentioned, it includes all the universities, all the colleges out there.
Yeah.
Students are, for lack of a better word, duped by all these pro-abortion things. And then you got the other community down there, which is Hillcrest, which is the LGBT XYZ community. How are we going to get into the universities and into the LGBT community and tell them, hey?
Well, I think we have to be realistic. I think that a lot of those landscapes are fairly lost. So the question maybe, it's kind of like having a budget. When my wife and I sit down and we say, we don't have enough money, there are 2 ways to attack that problem. One is to make more, and one is to spend less. And so if we can't make more by changing the minds of college students and changing the minds of the activists that are at Hillcrest, maybe we could spend less or maybe the opposite, make more. What we need to do is we need to activate the sleeping middle. I want to tell you, so I live in El Cajon. I won this election with 71% of the vote. We have a 3% Democratic advantage in El Cajon. I shouldn't win an election in El Cajon. If I do win an election in El Cajon, which should be like 1 point, but I won by over 20 points. And the reason is that I think that at least the people in El Cajon are in the middle enough that they're more interested. I'm talking about things like homelessness. I'm talking about quality of life issues, I'm talking about crime, I'm talking about protecting people, and people say, you know what, I like that. That's real, that really matters to me. So we gotta keep doing that, but we also have to activate, you've heard it said, I've heard it said, that if the Christian church were to be activated, we'd win every election. And that's kind of exciting, but there's a double-edged sword with that. Because every time I get into an election, I have these conversations with people, they say, I'm gonna activate the Christian community, they're gonna come out and vote for me, and it's gonna be great, we'll win the election. And theoretically, they're right, but I've lived long enough now to know that, you know, I love Christians. I am one, I come to church every week, but we are not involved. There's something wrong with us. We are asleep at the switch. You know, I raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to run for office. And I gotta be honest, I think in my entire 20 years running for office, I've raised less than $1,000 from Christians in this church. And non-believers and atheists give me tens of thousands. So I think we have to be realistic about that. But there are things that we could do that we're not doing. For example, ballot harvesting. It sounds like an ugly thing. Nobody wants to get involved in ballot. It sounds illegal, but it's not.
We have to do it.
It's the rules that, under which we're having to live. And so my plan for this next election is to activate the churches to get pastors. You guys can help me. You can put pressure on the pastors here and the pastors of the church. Say, let Republican candidates put ballot boxes in the lobby. Every time you get on the pulpit, say, I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but vote for somebody and bring your ballot here this week. You have to fight at that level. Yes, sir.
Morning, Bill.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming this morning. Thanks for all you do. I'm definitely your head cheerleader if you decide to run for that 51st. Boy, that is a lot of zip codes in that district.
Yeah.
It really is. But fast forward the tape. Okay, you passed the checkered flag, which is really the starting line. You're elected. What's the first thing you're gonna do? Number one. Number two, who do you think your biggest allies are gonna be in the state, Bill? I mean, you're steeply outnumbered by the enemy.
Yeah, I agree. Look, it is not ideal by any means. And if it were just about my political career, I'd move to Texas or someplace like that, where a guy like me can really get some traction. But this is where God has put me. I feel like this is where God wants me to fight and engage the enemy. I think we got to fight for the culture at all levels. I mean, I don't even know where to start. Let's start with global warming.
It's a whole.
And by the way, here's another way that I want to engage the enemy in global warming. If I go and tell a committed leftist Democrat that global warming is a hoax and that they're just doing it to separate you from your money and to subjugate you, they're going to turn me off. But I read a book recently that really changed my thoughts on this. And if you look at it this way, say, yeah, there is some global warming, but it's not nearly what they say it is, and it's not nearly as detrimental as they say it is. If we spend the $2 trillion a year that we're supposed to spend by the Paris Accords, within 100 years, they expect the global temperature to go down by 0.002%, which is not enough that you can't, and that's basically bankrupting all the economies of all the Western nations. Much better if you were to get really serious about digging and pumping out natural gas, exporting that throughout the world. If you export to third world countries where they're burning wood and they're burning coal and they're burning dung, and you give them natural gas to burn, which burns at about 95% cleaner, you're going to do more to reduce carbon emissions than if you got rid of every car in the world today. And so my question to people is like, if you're really committed to global warming, I'll give you the fact that maybe there's some global warming. Okay, let's agree to that. Why don't you want to do something that would actually fix it? Why are you committed to getting rid of energy for America? And is there some other reason that you're wanting to do this? Maybe are your leaders using a bait and switch with you to try to achieve some other goal and telling you it's about saving the planet? Let's save the planet together, but let's get smart.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the homeless. I know you have to deal with that.
Yeah.
But just briefly on the climate change hoax, which is what it is. I was alive when it was invented. And it was invented to take money from the oil companies and give it to the government. Because the government can't make money, it can only spend money. But I saw a whole show on YouTube where the boats from China that bring the solar batteries and panels, those boats burn the lowest form of diesel available. And those boats pollute more going from China to Long Beach and back than we save with the solar that they bring. It's on YouTube. What I want to talk to you about is the homeless, and I know you had to deal with it. I believe you told me one time that a lot of the homeless get sent to motels out in El Cajon. And the homeless problem just seems to keep getting bigger and bigger. And I saw a show where California receives $1 billion a year.
Oh, much more than that.
More than that. 10 billion, then maybe it's San Diego. But this money gets delegated throughout to fight homeless, and there's no accountability on how they spend it.
You're on something here.
Right. So say Todd Gloria gets a bunch of money, and he's got a left-wing crony guy that has a construction business. He can hire that construction business and overpay them to go clean up an area. And then with the leftover money, they contribute to his campaign. So therefore, the homeless money makes a circle and goes to political campaign for the leftists, the Democrats, and we'll have Democrats forever.
Boy, you couldn't be more right. It's what I call the homeless industrial complex. And you're touching on something that's a truism. And the truth is the left really doesn't want to clean up homelessness. If you wanted to clean up homelessness, it's really simple. It's not as hard as people make it out to be. First thing you have to do is acknowledge what the real problem is. The problem is not lack of housing. The problem is not lack of money. The problem is drug and alcohol addiction. If you ask any cop, any firefighter, any ER doctor, any ER nurse, they will tell you everybody that they encounter on the street is addicted to drugs and alcohol and or mentally ill, but usually both. And if you want to clean up homelessness, you got to deal with that problem. And then if you took your $10 billion and you spent it to help people get off drugs and alcohol, and you didn't give them a choice, and you said, you can either get clean and sober, or you're going to be incarcerated in some way, but you're not going to live on the streets, you could start to clean up this problem. But people don't have the political will to do that. And so that goes back to your question. That's one of the things I would do would be to really force people to look and do my best to force people to look at realistic solutions to helping people that are homeless, and not this pretend solution, because that only enriches the unions and the crony capitalists.
Right. But what FEMA does, FEMA goes in and cleans up the disaster. It tells you you can't clean the streets up there.
Well, speaking of FEMA, why are we spending trillions of dollars to destroy the energy sector in America for the possibility of maybe reducing the climate temperature by a fraction of a degree, and yet you care less that an entire area of Ohio has been contaminated by chemicals, and we say, oh, well, that's no big deal, they're fine. So because there's no money in the chemicals, there's tons of money in fighting global warming.
Along with Ohio, there's also other states that have had trade derailments in the recent past 60 days. And then in addition, Tucson, Arizona, they had a truck that overturned with toxic tests. All these things, are they coincidences, or do you think they're actually happening for?
It's an interesting time we live in, isn't it? It's an interesting time where the world has decided that because of global warming, we have to cut down fertilizer production. So 2/3 of the fertilizer that went to farmers is no longer being given to farmers, which is going to cause a decrease in global food supply. We're living in a state that we wash away 20 times the amount of water that every child in California could use, but we refuse to build a reservoir because it might hurt a fish or a frog. And we cut the water that goes on to the farmers, who California farmers at one point were producing 30% of the food for the entire world. And then we're having meat packaging plants are being hit by planes and
Arson.
there's something very nefarious going on, and it's really hard to see where conspiracy theory ends and reality begins. But there's strange things happening in the world, and it's not possible.
Just real quick. So is Senate really thinking about getting rid of their auditor and replacing him with an outside consultant?
Yes, I was on the audit committee. I was the chairman of the audit committee. And 2 years ago, they came in and they kicked me off the audit committee because
Doing a good job.
because I was working with the auditor to bring forth all of the auditor that we had, Mary Kay, was one of the most honest, hardworking people I've ever met. Very forthright, very committed to being an independent auditor, doing the right thing regardless of how politically difficult it was for her. And they tried to get rid of her from the day that they hired her. And they got rid of me, and then a year later, they've gotten rid of her. And so, no, there's no accountability again. San Diego is the most corrupt organization in San Diego.
Wow.
Billions, yeah.
All right. That's gonna be my.
We're out of time.
We're almost out of time.
It goes so fast, I could do this for like 5 hours. All right.
Bill, thanks a lot for spending your time with us.
My pleasure.
I would certainly advocate for you to really be the drumbeat for things that affect people in their daily lives, just the real pain points, like you mentioned, the cost of eggs, the fear that one has when they go to a store with people who might harm them. I think that's really a direction that's going to resonate with people.
I hope so. My hope is that there's enough people that are Democrats from a long time. I have, my wife's family they're Michigan Democrats, that are auto industry Democrats, that are good folks, good Christian folks that care about the country and care about decency and morality. They don't believe in this crazy direction of the New Democrat Party, but they don't know how to get out of it. I think we need a change in the conversation. We need to be able to tell people, you can still be a Democrat, you can still be pro-choice, and you can still vote for a rational, reasonable person that's not insane.
Let's give him a big hand. He's a fighter, folks. He's fighting for us. He's fighting for our values. Give him a big hand again. Good. He's fighting for us. You have a website?
It's wellsforcongress2024.com.
Can we donate?
Yes, especially you.
As you said, we live in unusual times, folks, and if you're discerning, and Holy Spirit gives you that vision, you can see that Lucifer is trying to fight against him. So he's our champion. Let's get behind him. Thank you.